Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth, Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. This is one of our favorite conversations from WUWM's daily talk show, Lake Effect.
When you think about archaeology, your mind probably went to a scene of an excavation site, probably in a dry landscape with hammers and dust and someone looking like Sam Neill in Jurassic Park. While archaeologists do uncover the ways people lived in the past below the surface through the places and artifacts they left behind, this is also done way below the surface, underwater. Underwater archaeology, or the study of submerged landscapes, is a relatively new field. In fact, UW-Milwaukee is just one of 2 underwater archaeology programs in the U.S. It's led by Associate Professor Dr. Ashley Lemke, whose previous work includes researching prehistoric hunter-gatherer sites in the depths of Lake Huron. Now, she's helping students explore similar submerged sites in Lake Michigan for the first time. To learn more, Lemke joins me now and begins by sharing how she first discovered the world of underwater archaeology.
I feel like I saw bits and pieces of it as a child without realizing what it was. The Little Mermaid is an underwater archaeologist.
Oh, that's so true.
Right?
Yes.
But it's not titled that, so you don't know. So when I was an undergraduate student in Texas, I was working in a lab and there was a guy there who was an underwater archaeologist, the first one I had met, and that's when I learned it was a real career.
Yeah, so what exactly does underwater archaeology entail?
Underwater archaeology entails, essentially, we're very interested in the human past. So we don't do dinosaurs and we don't do UFOs, which I think is very important. Anything that people did, though, that now has kind of wound up underneath water, that's what we're interested in. So most people think of shipwrecks. Of course, that's, what a lot of the underwater archaeological record is. But there's actually much older sites. There's cities, there's temples, there's all sorts of things that are submerged in the ocean.
Which is wild. Okay, so we're going Atlantis adjacent, right?
Yeah, exactly. but not UFOs.
But the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
So you actually started UW-Milwaukee's underwater archaeology program, and it's just one of a handful in the country. So what are you and your students focusing on? Is it Lake Michigan? Is it all the Great Lakes? Considering you're starting this, you have a lot of freedom, but I imagine you're okay, let's start with the focusing point we need.
Yeah, we mostly are focused on the Great Lakes. So because, hello, Milwaukee, you can't get in a better location to have this research institute, to go out. And so currently right now, my students, one's working in Lake Michigan, one just finished working in Lake Huron, one is working in Mexico, and another's working in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're Great Lakes focused, but we do underwater archaeology all over.
Okay, amazing. So let's get into some of the things you're looking for. So as you mentioned, there's prehistoric submerged sites, and this is kind of categorized as submerged landscape research. Can you describe that a bit more for us?
Yeah, submerged landscape research is one of these long academic words. What is this? So at the end of the last ice age, if we focus just on the Great Lakes for now, there were a lot lower water levels. So essentially, there's all sorts of environmental things that caused that. But, the glaciers kind of carved out the Great Lakes. They're slowly retreating up north. Then it's a more arid time around 10,000 years ago. And there are new river channels and water channels and all these things result in the lakes being much lower than they were. So that means there was a lot more dry land. And wherever there was dry land, people and plants and animals were living there. And it's now underwater.
Okay. So when we're talking about the research process, you mentioned you've been in town out on the boat for a few days. What does that entail? What kind of tools are you using to find landscapes that have been long submerged as you're out on the water?
We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of Lake Michigan. It's one of my favorite facts. It's just so crazy because you'd think we'd know so much about the bottom and we don't. So most of our research starts out with just mapping the lake bed. We use side-scan sonar, multi-beam sonar, something called a sub-bottom profiler that actually penetrates below the lake bed to see if there's things that are buried there. So
how far below does that go?
It can go basically as far as bedrock, as far as we need it to go, with different kinds of resolution. So we're looking for things on the surface, we're looking for things that are buried, and we have to do a lot of that mapping ourselves as archaeologists because it's not all mapped, and sometimes what is mapped isn't mapped to the resolution that we would need to see archaeological sites. So we start with that. And then actually I've been out with some students from the St. Francis School District. We've been working on an underwater robot that they built.
Incredible.
So middle and high school students have built their own underwater robot for our underwater archaeological research. And so we've been testing her out in the lake the last several days.
Good, good. And you mentioned mapping is a big challenge. What other kind of challenges do you face to collect and interpret the research you're gathering, especially since it's kind of a relatively new field?
It is a new field, and there's a lot of people doing it, and we all get along, which is really great. So people share stories and ideas and methods. Honestly, weather is our biggest challenge, I would say, because oftentimes we're going quite far out into the middle of Lake Michigan. So you have to have a boat that can handle that. You have to have a boat with enough space and enough power, to run all this equipment. But you also just want to make sure you're safe and you're having a good day out there. So we just wait for the weather. I've got like a bag packed at all times, and like if the forecast looks good, we just go.
Now, you've been slowly working, establishing this program, exploring the Great Lakes. What are some of your biggest or most exciting discoveries in this position so far?
So for me, a lot of this actually is based on my work that I did in Lake Huron before I got here. So for over 12 years, I was working first as a student and then as a professor and then with my students on archaeological sites that are submerged in the middle of Lake Huron. It's a big collaborative project. We've worked with a lot of different people, and that discovered 9,000-year-old caribou hunting sites that are in over 100 feet of water in the middle of Lake Huron. So
what do those look like?
Yeah, they're really crazy. So they're made out of stone. They're kind of stone features. Caribou follow straight lines naturally, and prehistoric peoples knew that, and they just made lines out of what they had available, rocks and wood, and they hunted caribou really effectively that way. But nobody had any idea that people in the Great Lakes were hunting using those methods. Nobody had any idea that sites were submerged that would be intact, right? They're 9,000 years old. There's forest down there. There's wooden trees that are still rooted in place because the cold fresh water is so good for preservation. So the idea was like, I had this project. I'd been working in the Great Lakes for a lot longer, but Lake Huron is just one. All 5 of them experienced those lower water levels. Like all 5 of them have archaeological sites and no one's ever looked. So I came to Milwaukee to start that program so we can start doing that work in Lake Michigan.
That's excellent. And you made an interesting point about the water, because I would assume that water can deteriorate a lot of things, but the cold lake temp is the key to preserving all these sites?
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive. You would think that water, would like erode or deteriorate wood, but when it's completely wet, then it preserves much better than if it were completely dry, or like wet dry. Wet dry is very bad for organic materials, things like wood, like shipwrecks, right? Or trees or ancient plants. So water in general, submerged completely, is very good. That's why underwater archaeology is all over the world, because it preserves sites much better than on land. But freshwater is even better. Cold freshwater is even better. Deep cold freshwater is basically as good as you can get. So the Great Lakes are, we love them because they're challenging weather-wise, but they're absolutely worth the effort and the respect of working there because they have the best preservation conditions for archaeological sites.
Now, when you are scoping and scanning, what are some of the things that are easiest to spot that indicate to you, oh, this could be something?
I mean, don't tell anybody, just kidding. But shipwrecks are kind of easy.
Sure.
Only because I say that in jest.
Or if we're going more historical than that.
Yeah, historical, like boats look like boats. You know, it's you don't know immediately which shipwreck it is, but they look different enough from the bottom. The real trick with looking at submerged landscapes is like the landscape is what you're looking for, right? It's not so much like what's a big giant thing on top of it. Like people in the deep, deep past, so 9,000 or even, older than that, they built things, but they also moved around a lot. So you don't have like a pyramid underwater that we can find those big targets. We're looking for very small stone tools. So hopefully, if they build things like the hunting structures we found, we can see those on the surface when they're not buried. A lot of what we're looking for is kind of a landform. Like, would there have been fresh water here? Would there have been an overlook here good for hunting? So you kind of think about it from the environmental perspective first, and then you hypothesize where might prehistoric peoples have lived. And then you get in and kind of get down in more detail and more in the dirt and start excavating.
And I see this is kind of tied in with anthropology and, studies of past humans. You mentioned it's giving us new information about how they hunted, how they moved. What other underwater discoveries have you been a part of, or this field in general? What are they teaching us about our human histories?
I think what I always tell people, and this is true, like Archaeology in general is like putting together a puzzle, but you don't have the picture on the box and you don't have all the pieces. So you already have this kind of creative aspect of it, but we're also scientists. So you're creating a hypothesis of what life was like with the past, but then underwater you have more of those pieces because the preservation is better. The other part of this is our stories aren't going to be complete if we don't look underwater. Like for hundreds of years, people have done archaeology and we make all these models and all these ideas of what we think life was in the past, but we're missing a lot of that story if we don't look underwater. So in the Great Lakes, we had those lower water levels where there was more land available for people to live. That happened all over the world on the continental shelves as well. So like 25%, right, of the land was just gone underwater. So there's so much more space. People like living on coast. I always tell people it's like, we'd all live on Lake Drive if we could. Like people in the past did that too. They wanted to live on shorelines, coastlines. They're really productive environments. They're beautiful, and so all of those shorelines are underwater now. So we don't know where a lot of those earliest peoples were living until we go and look underwater.
This is so incredible and fun to learn about. And you've been involved in this field, as you said, first in Lake Huron. Now you're at UW-M for more Lake Michigan-focused stuff. But for you personally, what's the most fun and exciting part about being a professor for students in a newer field who are now learning about this opportunity through you when you pieced it together yourself?
It's phenomenal because when I was trying to do this, I went to the University of Michigan and they just started an underwater project, but they didn't have a program. And a lot of people, professors that are about my age, we all kind of had to make it up as we went along. There wasn't like a place where you could go. And still UW-M is one of two anthropology departments that teach submerged landscapes right now. So
what's the other one?
Texas A&M.
Okay.
So you have Texas or you have Wisconsin and that's it, right? There's programs for shipwrecks that are all over that are very good as well. But this focus on submerged landscapes is so new and there's so few people doing it that it's phenomenal. We have students applying quite literally from all over the world to come here, which is great. Overwhelming because there's so many of them and I want to take everybody. But for me, the most exciting thing is actually been working with the middle and high school students lately because they're so unbounded in their creativity and they're just not stressed about anything. We would be like, oh, well, that's not going to work because it's expensive or that won't work because of scheduling. And the students are like, let's just make it happen. And they're right. That's the attitude that we should have is this is a problem. This is something we all want to work together to do. Let's do it. So working with middle and high school students is something I've never done until I came to Milwaukee. So that's been phenomenal.
Well, and I can't wait to learn more about what you are going to discover in Lake Michigan here and your work here. But for today, Ashley, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.
Dr. Ashley Lemke is an archaeologist and associate professor for UW-Milwaukee's anthropology department.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from your local NPR station, WUWM. Subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast to hear more great stories about Milwaukee.